Show me what you got!
Welcome in to yet another episode of To Be Frank. I'm Jake Reiser.
I'm Dan Schulman.
And I'm Jordan Tebow.
And for last week's seminar, we had two interesting guests, a part of the public relations. Well, now it's the media relations world. We had Laura Varillo of the New York Mets and Bill Wanless from the Pawtucket Red Sox. And I mean, the world of media relations is certainly changing, but it all kind of comes down to one thing. It comes down to the players and the team.
Yeah, and Frank Shore in his blog takes it a step further, and he calls it player relations, which I guess now in the social media age, I mean, you could argue it's either media relations or player relations, but it's all about making an impression with a player, and that starts with the media relations staff. So I know Laura Varillo talked about how difficult it is to get credentials for Major League Baseball. Bill Wanless says it's a little easier for that, but again, it all stems to social media and the way people are perceived. We've talked about it all semester now, and I was shocked to actually find out that they do give social media training to players at spring training for Major League Baseball. So, I mean, at least the players now are getting guidelines to it. And in this day and age, social media is becoming so important that Laura Varillo even mentioned that there's no press release for any transactions that is made within the club. They just tweet out, so-and-so has been called up or so-and-so has been designated for assignment.
Yeah, and Laura, even within the Mets organization, we had Matt Harvey a few years ago coming off of surgery and flipping off the camera and tweeting it from his personal account. So, and she talked a little bit about, how she deals with the younger players and their social media antics. And Bill kind of went into the Pawtucket system and said that, the only thing that he really needs to figure out in terms of social media training is players not congratulating other players when they get called up to the big league. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And Laura went into how she actually sits players down, and it is a changing media landscape. Imagine if older players had these social media platforms to say whatever they wanted from. I'm sure it would be a lot different. But I just thought it was interesting how Laura went into that and how they actually have to sit down players and say, hey, don't tweet this, don't tweet that, because everyone can follow you, and we saw it last night with Isaiah Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Bill Wanless also said another thing about really sort of catering to the digital age, how everything used to be done over the phone back in even a decade ago. Now, because the job has changed so much over the last 5 or so years, everything's done by email, by text message. Yeah, it's rare that you use a landline anymore, and that was a big point that both Bill Wanless and even Professor Shore made in the class.
Professor Shore brings up an example of a player and what happened to be media relations nightmare in his blog with Boogie Cousins. He almost just had one himself, and he talked about how everyone uses social media for information now. He had just been traded to the New Orleans Pelicans, and he was about to do an all-star press conference, and so the media relations guy promptly steps in and goes, guys, all-star questions first, and Boogie says, what are the questions you got there? And he has to lean in and tell him, hey, you've just been traded to the New Orleans Pelicans. And so imagine just the media relations nightmare you have with not even finding out via social media that you're standing in the middle of an interview and you can't just jump in and say, luckily this PR guy had the opportunity to, but imagine if in the middle of an interview you had to jump in and say, no questions about this, or, you have to really intervene there.
Yeah, and a big reason for that is because we have a lot of young reporters in the field, just like us, that might not have the experience such as some of the people we've had the privilege of talking to, like a Laura Varillo, Bill Wanless, who have been around in the media relations world for some time now, or even Ian Thompson, who's been a very reputable NBA.com reporter for a long, long time, probably one of the best NBA reporters out there. You have a lot of young media members who will ask hard-hitting questions that I wouldn't say they're not inappropriate in that they say something that's really, really bad. They're just inappropriate in that it's not the right time and place, and that's, I think, what a big part of media relations does, is to regulate those questions being asked.
Yeah, and I even saw a press conference this morning with the Kings general manager, Vlade Divac, and he was surrounded by the press in a media scrum, and he said, somebody had asked him about other offers that were on the table, and he said, I had a better offer 2 days ago. So you kind of think somebody in his circle is saying, why would you divulge that information? And then the other thing we were talking about with Isaiah Thomas last night, he tweeted out an emoji, like a pair of eyeballs. And there's a lot of trade talks going on in the NBA, and a lot of it surrounding the Celtics. So you got to think who in the media relations in the Celtics is saying, hey, Isaiah, like that's not something you want to do. It's not final yet. And that's part of the media training that everyone has to go through now. And it's just changing by the day. There could be a platform that comes out tomorrow, and players might need to be sat down and say, hey, you can't, like with Facebook Live and Antonio Brown, how he Facebook Lived the conversation that Mike Tomlin had with his players in the locker room. And the management and media relations were pretty angry at Antonio, and rightfully so. It's just that every day there becomes a new way to kind of brand yourself.
Speaking of being mad at players' relations being mad at someone and vice versa, we're all Bruins fans here, and so recently the whole epidemic with Don Sweeney. I wouldn't call it an epidemic. I'd call it an issue with Don Sweeney and the press conference that brought about firing Claude Julien, and how one of the first things he said in this press conference was, look, it's not my fault that the press conference was scheduled during the Patriots Championship Day parade. It was media relations who told me I had to do it as soon as possible. This just feels like such a thankless job sometimes. As important as it is for a team to maintain its image, sometimes it feels so thankless for opportunities like that where, sometimes you could have taken the blame for it. You could have said, I really apologize and not said anything, but you had to throw someone under the bus there, and it had to, in Don's case, he threw media relations under the bus.
Yeah, and for that, Jake and Jordan, what you were referring to with Isaiah Thomas's tweet, both actually go through media relations, and media relations has to take the brunt of it. So while the media relations job is different from being a journalist or a broadcaster per se, it's really not that different, to be honest with you. You have to know the same skills as being a journalist in order to work in media relations, because you have to understand sort of the clientele that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
And, that's not to say that you can't start out your career as a journalist or a reporter or a broadcaster and then make your way into media relations. One of someone that I know who has moved on from the Boston area is Eric Tosi, who used to be the media relations coordinator for the Boston Bruins. And I remember sitting with him at media dinner before a game earlier this season, and he was telling me he used to do play-by-play for basketball and for football at Holy Cross, and so he bridged the gap between doing play-by-play and being a reporter, and then making that into a career in media relations. So the two aren't mutually exclusive industries, for sure.
Yeah, and that's the big thing I got out of Laura coming to the seminar class, was just her words of, I don't really want to say encouragement, but just her story in all, and it's kind of incredible what she's done. She's gone from 5 or 6 different cities, and now she has a job that is her own. They the Mets have molded a job to curtail to her strengths and weaknesses, and she seems really happy now. But she was telling us when she got to cities like Albuquerque and Boise, Idaho, she was kind of all alone. But she still had those people in media relations to confide in and have fun with that on the job. So I think that Laura's path definitely isn't it's pretty unique, but also it's not impossible. If you start out as a broadcaster or if you start out in PR, oftentimes you can bridge the gap and get into the other side, whichever side it may be.
And I completely agree with that, because it's very hard to jump right into a big market like with where Laura is with New York, or even if you want to be a broadcaster or a writer in New York, because the media they're almost like sharks. Mm-hmm. They will bite on anything, and they're always looking for a hot take, and it's really a high-pressure job. But if you start in a market like Boise or like Albuquerque, where there's not as much pressure on you to get the hot scoop or to write the better story than the countless competitors you're dealing with, then you start to become a better journalist. You start to develop your skills. You start to make a name for yourself. And the path that Laura took, I think, is very admirable, and it's something that I could see probably many journalists, many media relations folk doing at some point in their career.
So then, guys, kind of as final takeaways here on To Be Frank, what was maybe the one thing that the guest said that you're going to take away with you as a journalist, and maybe what changed your view on media relations, and how does that affect you in the future?
Well, for me personally, it's now that we're all seniors and starting to look at jobs after we graduate, some of the jobs that I've actually taken a look at have to do with media relations because the job is very similar. You're compiling game notes, which is pretty much journalism. You're finding stats, and it's almost like writing a preview for the game, just not structured. You're writing recaps for the website. You're making sure that the press and the media have the supplies they need and they're all set. So, in a way, media relations and journalism are pretty much the same thing, just two different branches of that main thing. And either way you go, you're going to have to do one skill or the other. You're going to have to deal with one skill or the other, and it's important to know those skills and to really expand your horizons. And in the case of Laura Varillo, who has done broadcasts before, she's obviously been very successful with that, with Bill Wanless, who has been mainly media relations for 30-plus years now. He's definitely been around the block and is someone who knows how to handle the media.
Yeah, and I think my biggest takeaway kind of stemmed from what Bill was saying with, it's tough hours working in baseball where he works with the Paw Sox. He gets there early in the morning and leaves later at night. But, it was actually something that Professor Shore said that was my main takeaway from the whole thing. He said, it beats working for a living. Working in sports, it's a unique thing. Not a lot of people, kind of flock to it. But us three definitely have big aspirations to work in sports. And, it beats working for a living. It beats that desk job. And Bill was painting the picture at the Paw Sox games. He said the interns, sometimes they got to go run down and grab the tarp. And sometimes there's only three of you. And you got to try to muscle it over and save the game. And he said, I've done it sometimes. And Laura said she's done it sometimes. And, just setting up the facilities and, anything that they need you to do. And it's wherever you may end up. I kind of agree with Frank. I haven't really delved into the full-time job aspect. I've only had an internship so far. But I think working in the sport, the sporting world definitely beats working for a living.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just from my personal experiences, I was an intern with the Atlantic League's Bridgeport Bluefish for a short period of time, and I did everything under the sun you could think of working with the media relations department. I was working with players. It was a season that Pete Rose was actually going to come and be a guest manager for a game, so I organized all the events for that. I was a groundskeeper. I pulled the tarp on and off during rain delays.
Yeah, I heard a rumor that you dressed up as the mascot, too.
That is right. I was BB the mascot for quite a few events with the Bridgeport Bluefish. So I definitely gained such an appreciation for what they do. And it makes me think as a journalist that, again, it's something we've carried for a while, that everyone's a human. They're doing their jobs just as hard as we're trying to do our jobs, and to treat them with respect. No faces, no names. Do your homework, come in prepared, and treat them with the same amount of respect, and you'll get just as much out of them as you're giving to them. You'll get the interviews that you're looking for. You'll get, instead of like a 5-minute interview in a media scrum, you'll be able to sit down for 25 minutes for a longer feature piece, one-on-one, no risk of anyone trying to interrupt you, no holds barred on content. So just the amount of respect that you give them and the work that they do, you'll get in return. I mean, there was definitely an interesting seminar for you guys. I unfortunately couldn't be there, but I definitely see some of the takeaways, and I'm glad I was able to draw on my personal experiences with you guys. And that's going to be it for another episode of To Be Frank. Next week, we're going to have two members of the play-by-play industry come and speak with us. Ryan Smith, who is the media relations and broadcasting person for the Springfield Thunderbirds, and Bob Crawford, the voice of the Hartford Wolfpack, both of the American Hockey League, the minor league for the NHL. So I guess being hockey related, it'll certainly be of interest to the three of us as hockey journalists. But that's it for now. Alongside Jordan Tebow and Dan Shulman, I'm Jake Reiser, signing off.
I like what you got. Good job.